Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Virtual Viewpoints. Are you ready to run for office? Presented by the XIX Society. My name is Natalia Brownfield, and I serve as a Director of Development here at Texas Women's Foundation. Texas Women's Foundation's mission is to advance economic security and leadership opportunities for women and girls across the state. We believe that women should be full and active participants in every facet of our community, which is why we chose the conversation for today as we lead into the 2022 election year. According to the Center for Women in Politics at Rutgers University, women make up 26.5% of the Texas legislature, 48 out of the 181 members, and 26.9% of the US Congress, 144 out of 535 members. Have you ever thought, well, I'm interested, but I have no idea where to start, what it would be like, and honestly, why is my voice important? Does it even matter? The answer is yes, your voice does matter. Our panelists today, Tricia Windham and Claudia Sandoval, will share their own personal stories and advice. Andrea Flores is unable to be with us today due to an unexpected family situation. We hope that you walk away from today feeling inspired with a clearer picture of what first steps could look like. Now, I have the honor and privilege of introducing our moderator for today's panel, Cindy Masters. Cindy is the Director of Community Relations at Dallas College. Prior to this role, Cindy served as a Senior Specialist of Community Relations at American Airlines and the Director of Leadership Programs at the Dallas Regional Chamber. Her social impact and experience includes sponsorship and fundraising strategy, employee engagement, volunteerism, and board governance. Along the journey to discovering her passion for community impact, Cindy has worked in marketing and events and earned a BA in journalism, strategic communications from the University of North Texas. Personally, Cindy is passionate about initiatives that support women, criminal justice reform, and performing arts education. She and her husband, Brad, are native to and own a home in Plano, Texas. During her free time, you can find Cindy at home reading fiction, binging a new crime series, or starting a home renovation project. Cindy is also our current XIX Society chair. As you can see, she is truly passionate about intentional leadership and is a change agent in our community. Thank you for championing this topic, Cindy.
Thank you, Natalia. I'm so honored to be with you and all of our guests today and talking about such an important topic. I feel really lucky to have had strong women surround me my entire life. My mother and my grandmother were both business owners. I have had incredible female managers, mentors, and teachers, and I've been really lucky to look up to smart, strategic community leaders like Texas Women's Foundation CEO, Rosalind Dawson Thompson. However, when it comes time to vote, I'm always surprised to see so few women on the ballot. When I talk to my female friends and my colleagues, I hear passion for making policy changes, but I notice that I don't see as much confidence and we don't have the support to push them to throw their hat in the ring. And so I know I can personally do better to support them. And so I'm thrilled to be here with two incredible women to talk about how we can support and encourage women to run for office. So I'm going to introduce our panelists now. We have Claudia Sandoval. A native of Dallas and proud daughter of Mexican immigrants, Claudia Sandoval currently works in the areas of community development, economic development, and affordable housing with the National Development Council. She recently graduated with a Master of Public Affairs from the University of Texas at Austin's LBJ School of Public Affairs. She previously received her MS in Systems Engineering and her BS in Management Science from Southern Methodist University before going into technology and management consulting for 6 years. Additionally, Sandoval served on the Cockrell Hill City Council from May 2016 to July 2019, making her the youngest elected official in Dallas County at the time. Next, we have Tricia Windham. Tricia is an Oak Cliff resident with her husband and 3 children. She has worked as a public policy consultant since 2014, specializing in state advocacy, community relations throughout North Texas, and public education issues. Previously, Tricia served as the managing director for public policy for the Dallas Regional Chamber and was the founding executive director of Educate Dallas, the Chamber's political action committee focused on Dallas ISD school board races. Tricia is a graduate of Leadership DISD and Leadership Plano, as well as an active volunteer for several other community organizations. She earned her undergraduate degree in public policy from the University of Montana and her master's in legislative studies from the University of Texas at Dallas. So we're going to dive into our conversation, but before we do, we'd love to include some audience questions at the end. And so I'd encourage all of our guests to send any questions into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And we will do our best to ask our guests during the conversation today any questions you may have. So let's dive in. My first question is for Tricia. I'd love for you to talk about campaign structure, what's required of the candidate, what a path to victory looks like, and how someone gets started.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Good to see you, Cindy, and I appreciate everybody that's on the call this morning. I guess I'm one of the few people that likes to talk politics these days. So this is my favorite conversation, and I'm happy to be here with you all. I don't know if that makes me one of the same people or not, but it is an interesting subject right now, and we are living through some interesting times. So I'm excited to see so many people that are interested in this subject. So through my experience running campaigns, I've really come across, I think there's 3 things that it takes to be a good candidate. And the first one is just knowing your issues in your district. We've all seen those candidates that make like a big splashy introduction and they come out and then they do their first sort of interview, or they're at a forum and they're talking to constituents and somebody asks them about an issue and they're just not knowledgeable on it. And so what I would say is do the work and make sure you understand your issues, make sure you get what your constituents or would-be constituents are going through and facing, and that also you understand your district. Depending on what you're running for, a lot of these districts are huge with lots of different diversity in our communities and different issues that face people in different areas. And so making sure that you get that, you're not just running and you have a connection to one part of the district, but not the other. So knowing your issues in your district is number 1. Number 2, making sure that you have a network that's going to support you. So you've done the work, you know your district, you know your issues, but you've spent time, whether it's with your nonprofits that are working on supporting the communities in your district, or in your schools, you've been at city council, you've spent time in Austin, whatever it is, you've really built that network of people that you can reach back to that are going to lend you some of their credibility with their endorsements, hugely important, but also people that are believing you enough that they're going to be volunteers for you. They're going to block walk for you or make phone calls, put out signs, and really rally their networks to support you. That's essential. And 3 is just being able to run a good campaign. There's 2 things that I think are really important here is 1, being able to fundraise and raise money from your network, because it takes money to run campaigns. And if you can't do that, being able to create that grassroots network. And I think that there's a lot of negative that comes from social media, and we've heard a lot about that recently, but there's also some good stuff, and that it has allowed candidates to be successful with grassroots campaigns and actually end up victorious over people that are candidates that are better funded. And that didn't used to be the case. It used to be that if you raised the most money, you were the one that won, because that's, just what it took. And now with the ability to have our grassroots networks, it makes a huge difference. So it's nice to have both, to be the top fundraiser and have a good grassroots network, but you definitely need one or the other. So path to victory looks a little different for everybody, and it really depends on you as a candidate in your district. But generally you want to start early. And the very first practical advice I would give a candidate is to make that list of who in your network is going to support you, endorse you, and who's going to be willing to give some money to your campaign. And if that list is lacking, then that's where your work is to start building that list and those supporters right now.
That's so good. Thank you for that. some really good tidbits, and you make it so simple, like 1, 2, 3, but I know it's a little bit more
It's very
complicated
simple. It's
than
very
that.
simple.
Well, let's talk to Claudia. Claudia, you've done this, you've run a campaign, you've won. So we'd love to hear more about your personal experience of running for office, and what was the most difficult part of running a campaign?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, first of all, to the Texas Women's Foundation for having me, for inviting me. I'm honored to be with you all. Thank you, Cindy, for moderating, and Trisha for being here as well, and everybody who's joining us. So like you mentioned earlier, I am the daughter of Mexican immigrants. I did not grow up in a family who was involved in politics. I didn't know anybody in politics until I was in college and had the opportunity to intern with State Representative Rafael Anchia. And I started to learn more about what elected officials did and what their roles were in our community. And undergrad is when I really say that my political career started. I attended Southern Methodist University here in Dallas and ended up running for our student senate because there was a need to fill the Hispanic American student senate seat. And through that, really learned what a government body does in terms of policy and advocacy. And I had never really translated that to the real world, to city council, to school board. But after graduating from SMU and moving back home with my parents, who live in the city of Cockrell Hill, which is just 10 minutes from downtown Dallas, I, just noticed that a lot of things in our neighborhood had stayed the same from when I was growing up. By that, I mean, like, our streets were full of potholes. Nobody had fixed them. And I remember being in high school, a friend was dropping me off and they're like, man, these streets are awful. And I kind of joked with him and I said, don't worry, I'm going to fix them one day. And so that I remembered saying that, and I just got curious, like, who's responsible for fixing this? Why haven't they done this? And so I started going to council meetings and started, getting to know all of our council members, our mayor, our city administrator, and just realized, I think I can do this. I think I have ideas that I think I can contribute and are of value. And in that time, which was around 2015, I learned about a new leadership academy called the Latino Center for Leadership Development that was starting up. And they wanted to train people who were interested in running for public office, particularly Latinos or people who would be serving in Latino communities. And so I was able to be a part of that inaugural class. And that was tremendously helpful because, like Trisha said, there is a lot that goes into a campaign. And when you don't know, when you've never done it before, you just don't know. But there are a lot of technical things that you need to know in terms of like fundraising and filing papers and finding your treasurer. So that to me was really like what helped me understand what the process is. And I think once you understand, like, here are the steps, it's easier to just say, okay, well, step one done, step two, instead of just kind of being frazzled by everything, because it is a lot, especially for a first-time candidate. And I would say the most difficult part of running the campaign is exactly what Trisha said. It's the fundraising. It's especially nerve-wracking, I think, for a first-time candidate to have to ask people for money. In my experience, we had a much smaller race. Our fundraising goal for our campaign was $3,000. That is very small compared to larger races like Dallas City Council. But for us, that was going to be enough for our entire campaign. And the way that we fundraised was, like Trisha said, all through social media. So I basically, we set up our campaign website, and I just literally sent a message to every single person on my Facebook and said, hey, I'm running for office. Here's why. I gave them my short little pitch and asked for $10. And a lot of people were like, yeah, sure, here's 20, here's 50, here's 100. Some people gave 5, some people gave 10. But we ended up raising over 5,000. And I think that was the most anybody in Cockrell Hill had ever raised for a city council race.
Wow.
So there are a lot of different ways to raise money. Leveraging social media is a good tool. But traditionally also a lot of people will, just call up that list that Trisha was referencing to and say, hey, can you donate $500, $1,000, depending on that race and how much your goal is. You're going to have to make some bigger asks, and that's where it can get a little more nerve-wracking, but it does get easier the more that you do it. Making that ask will get a lot easier.
No, that's so good. And something I think it is scary for a lot of people to ask for money and to do it for yourself, right? Say, I want you to bet on me and give me money so that I can run. Very different than raising money for, a cause that you're really passionate about or something, right? So I can definitely see how that would be tough, but good for you. That's amazing. I didn't know that was the most anyone had raised. So that's awesome. So I'd love to talk back with Trisha. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about what inspired you to get into this line of work. You said at the beginning that you're, maybe one of the odd folks that loves talking politics. So when did you know, this was your thing, and how'd you get started? What inspired you?
Sure. So I grew up in Montana, and I grew up on a farm, like 4th, 5th generation farmers. And our everyday issues were pretty front and center for us all the time. And when I went into college, I knew I didn't want to be a farmer. And I was pursuing psychology, but my campus was really politically active. And in ways, that's what got me inspired, although it was usually kind of on the opposite side of some of the bigger issues that I saw a lot of like my other students rallying around, because I had just grown up in such a different way as so rural and such different issues facing my family. And so it got me interested in politics because I felt a disconnect between what I saw being talked about and what I actually knew was important to like my family's life and the lives of the people from my community. And so I was really interested in it. I ended up with a political science degree, moved to Texas, and I basically just harassed a political consultant here. Her name was Carol Reed, until she gave me an internship, and she was arguably the best and most well-known political consultant in Dallas for a long time. And it sort of opened the door for me to get involved and make those connections in Dallas. But it was really just that. It was seeing the disconnect between what actually makes a difference in people's lives and what our politicians or even the people that are, the supporters and the rallies and this kinds of stuff, the things that people are talking about, it felt like that wasn't what we actually need. And so I got involved interning for Carol Reed. I really planned to focus on political campaigns, and then I worked on a political campaign and I found they're really not that fun. I don't think they are. And so I do a lot of the kind of government relations side of it too, for business organizations, but I keep coming back to the political consulting side because there's not enough people in Dallas that do it, and do it without having to be aligned to a certain interest. And you can't have good policy without good people running for office. And so I felt like, and I still feel like, I can't walk away from this part of what I do because I see the policymaking side, whether it's on city council or school board or the legislature, and I see what happens when we have really good people that get elected and what happens when maybe we don't. And so it feels sort of like an obligation that I have some of this skill and knowledge, and that I continue to use it to support candidates that I think would be good for our public entities and good for policymaking. So it's been sort of a long journey, and it, like most people, I think in politics, a really personal one, but it's really important to me. I joke every day that I'm gonna go be a librarian and get out of this world, but I haven't done it yet because it's really important, and we need good people to stay involved.
No, that's so good. Yeah, that's so true. And thank you for doing that. Doing something you maybe don't love doing, but it's so important. So thank you for your leadership in that way. We really appreciate that. And I think it's really interesting that both of you guys talked about college and, being such young women that, were drawn to this space at a young age. And that's really exciting. I'd love to talk to Claudia about, serving in that role. I think your bio mentioned that you were the youngest elected official in Dallas County when you served in your role on City Council for Cockrell Hill. And then also being female, layering that on top of it. I'm sure you maybe got some pushback or some feelings about that. I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about what your experience was specifically from the lens of serving as a young woman.
Yeah, definitely. I do just want to echo what you said about Trisha really quickly, though. I think she does immensely important work in the city and has helped and is helping to improve our political landscape. So thank you, Trisha. So when I first ran in 2016, I was, I think, 25 or 26. I don't remember, one of those. But I did receive pushback for being young. People thought I was younger than I was, and not as much for being a woman, surprisingly, but just for being young. People, when I was block walking and knocking on doors, they would look at me and they would look at my my pamphlet that I was handing out, and they would look at it and say, "Is this you? You look too young. Like, can you even vote?" So a lot of people just didn't see me as, I think, what they think a candidate should look like. But once I would start talking to them about the issues and, telling them my story, that I was born and raised in Cockrell Hill, that I, grew up going to DISD schools, that I went to SMU and, I had this engineering degree and I was working in this area and had been attending council meetings for the last 3 years, and talked about those issues and asked them and listened to them about what they cared about, then they seemed to feel more comfortable with saying, okay, yeah, I can vote for you, I can support you. And that was the same kind of reception from the existing council members at the time and the mayor. A lot of them were really skeptical at first when I started going to council meetings. They would always, at the beginning of a council meeting, there's always time for public comments when anyone can go up and, talk about anything that's on the agenda. And they would always kind of wait for me to go up and speak, thinking that I was there to make a complaint or something, which is usually the case. But I was just there to learn and to listen to what was happening. And so I think after seeing me there for so long and getting to know me and hearing some of my ideas and hearing some of what I had to say about what was, on the agenda or issues that were in the community, they really began to see me as somebody who cared and who was serious about, what was going on, not just there to complain or not just there to kind of pick a fight with them. So yeah, I think, it is probably not going to be uncommon for a young person to get pushback, but I think the important thing to do, which is something that Trisha had mentioned, is do the work, be there, learn about the issues, be engaged with the community. And that can look differently. For me, it looked like attending council meetings and starting a neighborhood association with my neighbors. But it can also just look like volunteering at the library once a week, or, going to pick up trash in your community with your neighbors. Depending on what the issue is that you care about, you can find a way to get involved in that way, either through a nonprofit or through your own initiatives, and just start to meet people and get to know them, so that they understand that you actually care. You're not just doing it to show face, because it's coming from the right place. But yeah.
That's so good, and such a good reminder for all of us, right? To go into those situations with curiosity and genuine, interest in what's going on. And I think, if you've sat in anyone that's in this audience that's sat in a city council meeting has had people that have gone to city council meetings just to go and talk. And so, I mean, how powerful. And I mean, for being such a young person and having that wisdom, I mean, kudos to you. That's fantastic. Really, truly awesome. What I'd love to dig a little bit more into is, you spoke a little bit about the leadership program you were involved in for Latina elected officials or in Latino communities. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that and why it's important for women of color to serve in political office and in leadership positions, really in any leadership position.
Yeah, definitely. Where to start? I mean, women make up, we heard the stats earlier that Natalia read, less than a third of elected officials are women in almost any capacity. But we represent over 51%, we represent about 51% of the total US population as women collectively, and women of color are in some of the fastest growing parts of the population. Yet we are not represented at all. If women overall are less than a third of total electeds, women of color make up even less. And I think it's important to see women of color, not just for the descriptive representation where you can see someone who looks like you in a position of power and in a position of influence and advocacy and authority, but also because there's been research that shows that women prioritize policy issues differently than men, and people of color furthermore prioritize policy issues different than their white peers. And so women of color being in both of those are going to prioritize policy issues much differently, and are going to be, I think, more in tune with what's going on with their communities and what issues are affecting our communities, more so than, a cis white male who may not even be of our generation. And that's, may not always be the case, but I think more likely than not, it is going to be. So I think it's really important for us to be in any position of leadership, because we're going to understand those issues. But also, just because you have a Latina or an Asian woman or whatever the case is, it doesn't always mean that they're going to have the same views. We're not homogeneous, but so it is also really important to have someone who has similar experiences as you and get that substantive representation. And so I think it starts with getting more women just to be able to understand what these roles are meant to do, how they impact our communities, and then get them in, and then do things like this that teaches them what the steps are to run, or maybe what some valuable information would be for them to run. But it is extremely important, and we're seeing it more and more, right? The last few years, there have been a record number of women of color running for office and winning. In Dallas, Carla Garcia on the Dallas Independent School District is the first Latina ever and the youngest person ever to be elected. And that is huge in a district where over 50% of the student body is of a Latinx household. So I think the more that we see ourselves, the more we can see that, it's possible for us to go higher and higher. Thankfully we have VP Kamala Harris and hopefully we get one step higher next time.
That's so good. And I think you're totally right, right? Like this, we could spend hours just talking about that one specific topic, but I think you're just, even in your short commentary, I think it is dead on, and I just really appreciate your insight there. So thank you for that. Trisha, I'm going to take this next question to you. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the current political climate. What do high quality, successful candidates have in common right now, especially in our current political climate?
Sure. So it's not a secret. I think for most of us, the current political climate is kind of hard, whether you're a policymaker or observer or just a voter. There's a famous quote I think about a lot, and it says, "We get the government we deserve." And so we can be frustrated, we can be happy with it, whatever our feelings are with how things are going, but we have to remember that government is really just an extension of us, the voters. And so if we're tired of division and we're tired of, the big headline issues, but not the nuts and bolts, bread and butter stuff, then we as voters are the ones that are going to make that change happen. And so I think that when we talk about part of the political climate, it's not just who's going to run for office that's going to bring some sanity back, but also what are we as voters going to do to support those people? And I have a little bit of a soapbox about this right now, but I think that you heard Claudia talk about, she ran for office. What first made her even think about it was her streets. And so for us as voters, we have to get passionate about those sort of nuts and bolts, bread and butter issues and the candidates that are focused on them just as much as the big headline issues. And those are important. I'm not saying they're not, but fixing our streets, funding our schools, zoning for our businesses and our neighborhoods, reforming criminal justice system or foster care system. These are the things that make our daily lives, our world go round. And as voters, we really need to, I think, take a step back from the really hot topics. And again, those are important, but you have to be looking at candidates and expecting your candidates to be focused on the nuts and bolts, bread and butter stuff too. We saw what happened when our elected officials take their eyes off that ball last winter with the failure of our grid. And we were all, huddled around our gas fireplaces trying to keep our families warm and alive. And I would say that's a bread and butter issue. That's not an issue that most people are passionate about or know a lot about, but that's what happens when we elect elected officials that are focused more on those often divisive big headline topics and not about what just keeps us safe, what keeps our businesses open and running, what keeps our schools teaching kids and helping to open up opportunities for them. And so for us, I would say, successful candidates, good candidates try to make our lives better, but successful candidates have voters and supporters that believe in that too, and that are going to be there and support them in the same passionate way about fixing our streets, about code compliance as they are about the stuff that we read in the news every day. And so our political climate right now is hard. And I think it's on us to fix that. Even if you're not somebody that wants to run for office, we need to expect our elected officials and our candidates to be focused on the stuff that makes our lives better, and not just the big issues. So I could talk about that all day because it's really a passion of mine. And I think it's something that, we all have this knee-jerk reaction when we see it swing one direction to want to swing it back the other way as hard as we can. And I think that cycle is not going to be helpful to any of us, no matter what side of the issues you're on, if we don't get back to a government and on all levels that's really focused on making your life better every day for you and your family and your neighbors.
Yeah, that's such good feedback, and very easy to get, off topic onto things that are hot and fancy and exciting to talk about, but maybe not relevant, right? Not relevant to your day in and day out.
I think it's interesting when we look back last winter at the storm, that was all anybody talked about. When our grid failed, we weren't talking about the other divisive issues, and they are important, but that wasn't the headline. It was people are dying in their homes because they're cold. And so when you lose focus on that, and when you lose that from elected officials, it's a really horrible reminder of what's really important, and why government is supposed to exist, is for those types of things.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Well, that was fantastic. I really appreciate you guys sharing. I have one final question before we'll go to audience Q&A. And we're just gonna, same question for both of you. What would you advise someone who is thinking of running for office? And we'll start with Claudia.
Yeah, you know, I would go back to what Trisha said earlier, is do the work. Start, you know, learn what the responsibilities of that office that you want to one day hold are, and start going to those meetings. You know, try to get on a board or a committee if possible. That's a really great way to learn more of the ins and outs from the inside, as opposed to just you know, attending the meetings, is being a part of some of those meetings and learning those structures. But yeah, just start to get involved in any way that you can, learn the ins and outs, start volunteering on other people's campaigns, so that you really start to understand what it takes to run a campaign, how you get volunteers, how you fundraise, what types of events do you have to do? What does it mean to canvass? What does it mean to poll watch? What does it mean to go block walk? All those things. Yeah, just start to get involved and really intentionally learn about the work that's needed, so you can, once you get there, you can serve well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Everything Claudia just said, and to add on to it, just to say, make sure that you understand, you know, what is your passion? What do you want to do? And am I running for the right position? Because as candidates, you really get one, maybe two shots to kind of run a campaign without being successful, and then without being labeled as sort of this perennial candidate. So make sure that you're making your first impression count when you run for office, and part of that, most of that, is doing the work like Claudia said. So be really conscious that I want to run for city council, you know, be genuine about what you want to be on, and so you know that this is intentionally where I want to be, and I don't just, you know, not just looking for an elected position. This is where I want to be, because this is where I think I can make a difference.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Well, we have a few questions. Just as a quick reminder to the audience, if you have a question you'd like us to answer, or one of these experts to answer, please put it in the Q&A section at the bottom, where it says Q&A. I have a few questions in the Q&A box right now. So we'll start with this one, which I think could go to Trisha, but Claudia, feel free to jump in. Both of you, feel free to jump in on any of these questions. There seem to be a lot of rules about running a campaign, and the legalities can be really scary. You do not want to do something wrong or unethical. How do you manage those rules of running?
You know, I think part of it is going back to the doing the work. When you get involved, it is nice to have some existing relationships with some experience where you can lean on them for some advice. But you know, at the end of the day, unless you're running for federal office, the elections here in Texas are governed by the Texas Ethics Commission, and they're extremely helpful. Actually, you can just call a number and ask a lawyer there. They also have all kinds of guides on their website that are written for laymen to read through and understand the regulations. And then when you run for local office, those also have their own rules, whether it's city council or school board. And you can just go to whether it's their board secretary or whoever, city secretary, and ask for those regulations and read through them. So at the end of the day, it's nice to get good advice, and you can hire people that can help you give you that advice, but you're the one that's responsible for it. And so making sure that you're not just relying on that, but you're actually going and reading those rules and regulations. And I think people will be surprised by how actually easy they are to understand, and how many people are willing to help you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Oh, Claudia, go ahead.
I was just going to add, in Cockrell Hill, we have one city administrator, a city secretary, and like 2 other people in our office. who are always super helpful in answering any questions. I definitely called the ethics office a few times as well. But also, like Trisha said, once you get involved and meet those people, I happened to run at the same time as 3 other friends of mine who were in that academy. And so we would text each other, hey, don't forget campaign finances tomorrow, or don't forget, you know, we have to turn this in. And those are big deadlines that like you wouldn't miss anyway, because everybody talks about them at the same time. But yeah, there is a lot to learn, but also a lot of resources available when you are in the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so I think this question could go to both of you as well. So we'll start with Claudia and then go to Trisha. Policy change is usually a marathon, not a sprint. How do you stay positive if your issues and passions are not on the winning side? And this person also said, maybe Trisha can talk about building the DISD Board of Trustees, but I think they may mean the Educate Dallas Board. So feel free to answer that as you'd like. Claudia, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, you know, I stay positive because I know that there's always change that's possible. Nothing is really permanent in policy. Things are always changing, and it is really unfortunate when something tragic happens that makes people kind of wake up. But there's also always a silver lining to it. You know, like Trisha mentioned, the electric grid failure earlier this year made people wake up to what is the PUC and why is it important? Why should we care about this thing that we never hear about? You know, after 2016, so many people were mobilized to run for office, to register voters, to get out and vote. We've had historic voter turnout the last few years because people care. And, you know, that's what we want to see, is people who care, that turn out to vote. And so, yeah, I think there's always hope in that we can organize and change things for the better.
Yeah, I think for me, it's also just when you're in the weeds and when you're doing the work, it's the little things. Like I remember last year, I guess, I worked on the DISD bond campaign, and we got off to a late start. And you know, when you work on campaigns, you do the big stuff and the little stuff. So I was taking some yard signs to somebody driving through the city and was like kind of emotional about seeing all these yard signs in people's yards. And it just made me so like proud of our city that at a moment's notice, when there's a call out to support our schools, all these supporters pop up overnight. And so it's taking pride in those little moments, and it kind of fills your cup for the times when you have a bad day. And I think the question about the school board, this is a subject I really could talk about all day, but I think the DIC school board is a really interesting case because 10, 12 years ago, it was in the news every day for being a mess and for people being kicked out of meetings. And it was just a little bit of an embarrassment at times for the city. And now we have one of the most innovative, forward-facing school districts in the country, the fastest improving urban school districts in Texas. And we have a board that has 9 very different individuals on it that have different backgrounds and different viewpoints that largely work together and are focused singularly on what's best for kids and how do we create opportunities for kids and make sure that they get an opportunity to live their best lives. And the biggest takeaway from that is along these same lines is to remember that you know, that really came out of this coalition being built between the Dallas business community and progressives and conservatives and all this. And so the takeaway for me there is that you just really never know where you're going to find people that can be allies for a cause. And so, you know, don't write people off because you think you don't agree with them on this other issue, and maybe you will on this. And we wouldn't be here if that sort of strange bedfellow coalition wasn't built to support the DISD school board. And And I get a lot of comfort from that too. Just there are really good people out in the world. Most of the people out in the world are good, and especially when you can find issues that you can align on. So those are the things that keep me going on the hard days.
I think that is fantastic feedback and great questions, by the way. Thank you to our audience members that have asked questions. Don't forget that you can ask questions in the Q&A section below. And Trisha, I love both of y'all's feedback, but really appreciate that insight on DISD, joining the landscape now. When you come to Dallas or you relocate to Dallas for the first time, it's not the same as it was 15 years ago, where people would be like, well, you have to put your kids in private school or move to the suburbs. There's just no other option. I think that I've seen many converts over the years that even thought that way and have, made changes to put their kids in public school because of that work. So thank you for your leadership there. And thank you for that, that note. I think it's so important. So thank you. So our next question is asking about partisan versus nonpartisan. So some races are partisan and others nonpartisan, such as the city council. Are there big difference in running those campaigns?
Yeah, I would say a huge difference. And I really prefer to work on the nonpartisan because, like I referenced with the DISD school board, if you drill down into our actual trustees, sort of partisan Democrat, Republican politics, they're all over the spectrum. I mean, they're all over, but when they sit at the horseshoe and talk about student achievement, they're pretty much aligned. And I enjoy that about local politics, whether it's school board or city council, that it's not about which team do you play for, but it's about issues and where do you align. And you can build coalitions on one issue that are people that are on completely different sides on another. And I think that that's refreshing. I am frankly really burned out on the party politics because I think that politics should be about people and not parties. So it is a huge difference. And when you were thinking about it from a candidate perspective, that's something to consider is, are you really passionate about the issues that can only be worked on from a partisan perspective? Or are you passionate about, your streets and things like that you can work on from a nonpartisan local position?
No, that's great. Thank you. Claudia, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, not on this one.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, I think that's our last audience question. So what we'll do now is turn it back over to Natalia and go ahead and close out the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I do have one question for Claudia and Trisha, if you don't mind. What are you most proud of in your work so far?
Go ahead, Claudia.
Yeah, I think for me, what I'm most proud of from my time on city council, it was starting a junior council program where we invited high school students to join us as junior council members without voting rights, but they, had to come to one council meeting a month and had to do a community project. We had 3 young women who joined us for about 2 years when I was there before I left. And they started an Earth Day festival in Cockrell Hill that happens in April now. And they both learned a lot about, serving as a council member and what a city budget looks like, what those line items mean, how to organize a community event, how to reach out to voters during election season. That's something that wasn't there before and is something that is really needed to start building a pipeline of young leaders. I think that's, the other important thing is we need to engage high school, middle school, elementary school kids to start learning that it's normal to be involved in politics or just like your community, and we need you to be. So I think that's what I'm most proud of.
I think for me is I started in this work in 2011. And I think if you fast forward to today, there are 155,000 kids in DISC that are in a better spot because of the policies and the board that govern their school district. And that is the work of a lot of really good people. And it took every single one of them. And I'm honored that I got to play a small role in that. And for me, that, you know, there is public education is my soapbox. It's the issue I could talk about all day. And I think that, you know, who we are as a country, as a community is dictated by how well we do with our public schools. That's our future. And so the idea that we have improved kids' lives through politics and through our elections and ultimately then through policy is what I'm most proud of. And I'm really proud of the way that this city that I love sort of created this coalition that supports our school districts and loves those kids in it. Like each one of them are our own. And that is, to me, makes all the hard times worth it.
Thank you both so much for your work and your passion. And thank you for sharing your stories with us today. Cindy, thank you so much for moderating the discussion. We hope that it was inspiring to those who are on the call today. I think what resonated with me the most is this concept of intentionality, right? This intentionality of really driving change in the areas in our community that we're really passionate about. And we hope that you walk away, maybe it's not a political office, but as Claudia said, if it could start with volunteering and picking up at White Lake, for example, if that's something that you are passionate about. So as a follow-up to this discussion, we will be sharing resources on races in our area and steps that you can start taking to start doing the work. So as I mentioned before we got kicked off on our conversation, our virtual Viewpoints is brought to you today by Texas Women's Foundation in partnership with XIX Society. XIX Society is named for our 19 very diverse founders who then founded us as Dallas Women's Foundation. We're a group of more than 150 individuals who are continuing their legacy by investing in economic security and leadership of women and girls and their families across the state at all ages. If you're interested in investing in our mission, engaging with those, you want to share, advance, if you're wanting to engage with others who are passionate about advancing opportunities for women, consider joining the XIX Society. Our next event will be on December 7th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Industrious Workspace at the Farmers Market. We would love to have you. So again, thank you to Cindy, Claudia, and Trisha for your time today. And thank you all for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.